Hello, world. This is Russell Miller with Umpqua Feather Merchants. We are live on the Trouts Instagram. Today we're going to be talking about Euro nymphing. So, bring your questions. I'm here to answer what you guys have. Howdy, howdy. We got some people joining in, which is wonderful. You guys all hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up in the feed if you can hear me. Perfect. Good. So yeah, I think what I'm going to start by doing with the presentation here is we're going to run over some of the equipment for it. We're going to run through some of the techniques. I'll run through some of my flies. And then I'm here to answer some of your guys' questions and give you guys a little insight to take out on the water when you're out there practicing safe social distancing through fly fishing. A little background on myself. I've been a member of the U.S. national team now for, since like 2006. So a few years. I've been to 5 world championships, fished in 3 of those. I'm into it, to say the least. So hopefully there's some stuff in here that you can take with you and take out on the water. So when we're talking about gear in general, there's certainly some more specialized tools out there. The Euro rods are becoming a little bit more popular in this day and age. A Euro rod I would classify as something that is really 9.5 feet at minimum, and really it's 10 feet plus. And the reason for the long rods is it allows you to reach far currents. If we were to go out and do this on the water, you would watch me fish these. I'm rarely fishing underneath the rod tip. I'm really fishing at distance, and the long rod allows me to use the length of my arm in addition with the long rod, and I can really reach a long way to keep my flies in specific currents and have a lot more control over my drift. It's not really just like short line nymphing underneath your rod tip. I'll back up just a second, and there is kind of 2 schools of European nymphing styles, and that was born out of the regions that these styles were born out of. You have short line nymphing techniques, which are associated with kind of that Czech and Polish style nymphing, which is, I think, how a lot of us in the States were introduced to this idea of Euro nymphing. Heavy flies, plunked into a pool, under tension of the rod, and you field the take. It's really effective on high gradient streams like we have here on the Front Range. Like, I live here in Golden, and Clear Creek is just up the road from me here, and like the whole canyon section of Clear Creek is short line nymphing, that Czech and Polish style. The other side of the coin that the guys in the States didn't grasp onto for quite some time, and it is unbelievably deadly, is the long line stuff. And the French and the Spaniards have truly mastered this technique. And if you look at it, it's a result of their rivers, right? So their rivers are very low gradient. So if we were to kind of think about like the lower Roaring Fork or some of the meadowy stretches of the Colorado River or the Williams Fork, where you're going to fish really long glassy pools and have a little bit more wary trout. So they had to be able to fish 40 feet. And so they use really long rods and really light flies. The whole Perdigon fly revolution is born out of those techniques. So what we've got now and what we'll run through here is a hybrid of all that. It's what the guys on the team are fishing currently. And it just allows you to go through, a double nymph rig underneath the rod tip, and then you could spread that out and fish it 40 feet from you. Or you could put on a dry dropper or jig streamers, all that kind of stuff. I'll get into my leader setup here in just a moment. I see a question about that. So as far as rods go, my favorite is this is the Sage ESN 10-foot 3-weight. I think this is about as versatile as a rod you can have for any condition of fishing. I fish it more than any other rod I've got. It truly is my favorite. A down-locking reel seat helps pull that weight back, and when I'm fishing it, I hold it all the way back here. Why would I lose the extra 6 inches of grip here when I can hold it back here? Because I'm trying to extend the amount of space that I have. So I hold it back here. On there, I've got Sage's old 4250. It's my favorite reel. It's a cool limited edition they did for the guys of the team, which I think is pretty cool. But one of my favorite things about it, and it wasn't designed to do this, but it free spools like this. So when I've got a lot of line out and I do hook a fish, I can literally hit the outside of it twice, and I can get the fish on a reel really, really, really quickly without a lot of fumbling around wondering where my handle is, right? So this is my favorite reel. This is the 4250. It's a 5-weight reel on a 3-weight rod, and my goal is always to have something that feels good in hand. Balance to me isn't a critical component of all this, where I need to make sure it weighs out on my finger appropriately at the edge of the cork. I want something that I can extend my arm all the way, all day long, and have just a really light setup. So this is what I use. 3-weight for steelhead seems light. I couldn't agree more. I would not go steelhead fishing with this. Bad for the fish. But with the 3-weight, it's the 9-foot 5-weight of European nymphing rods, right? So if you're used to fishing a 5-weight, the 3-weight's perfect. If you're used to fishing an 8-weight, you'd want to get like a 10-foot 6-weight would be a great rod for an 8-weight application if you did want to go steelhead fishing. But I have my own personal beliefs on that. My world and my personal beliefs are that this kind of method is great for consumptive trout fishing. If you really want to understand trout behavior and get good at that, European nymphing is great. If you're going to go fish for steelhead, my belief is steelhead are not about numbers but moments, and if I'm going to go chase moments, I'm going to do that with a 2-handed rod. So that's my personal yin and yang there. So that's my rod. We'll take a look at the leader here. I was just down at Decker's last weekend with the family, kind of just getting a little outside time. We took a beach to ourselves, and I fished a little bit, and we relaxed down at the beach. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling off my leader. I'm going to show you guys 2 different leaders. The first leader here, I would say this is my leader. This is what I fish. You can see ever since we got into a colored portion here, I've just been pulling off level line, and now I'm at my fly line, right? A while back, I was actually talking with Rick over at Trouts, and he was asking a couple questions on this stuff. The question was, why not just use all monofilament on your reel? Why incorporate a fly line at all? And it's a really fair question. The fly line incorporation was a rule modification by FIPS-MOOSH, which is the governing body for fly fishing in the competitive world. And it was because guys were just loading up their reel with all monofilament and literally like lobbing it across the river. And you can have a ton of control. A lot of people believe we had lost the essence of fly fishing without a fly line. And I tend to agree with that. The fly line, to answer that question directly, the fly line adds a couple benefits that straight monofilament does not. One of the benefits is when it's colder out this time of year, and I'm going to sit here and I do a lot of work with my left hand, it's much easier to manage this line than it is straight monofilament, especially when your hands get cold. When we're talking about, those beautiful 90-degree days of summer, not that big of a deal. But in the colder weather, this fly line is very beneficial. The other thing I like about actually having a fly line is that I can throw dry flies with this. I love throwing a single dry fly, and this line allows me to do some of that. So I'm just jumping in here. What do I use for my butt section? Fire. Got it. So on this one, there is no butt section. My butt section is level 6-pound high-vis material. It's ultra thin. Again, I'm going to show you 2 leaders. For those of you guys just tuning in, we're doing a European nymphing rundown here of some of my stuff. I'm Russell Miller with Umpqua Feather Merchants. So this leader here is my nymphing leader. This is, we've kind of dubbed it the micro leader. It says legally as much level high-vis material in 6-pound that I can do. Here's a giant downside of it. What do you think of that for a demonstration? That's fun. But it's about 15 feet of this stuff. And then I come down to... Boy, I did not think this through when I was pulling line off and just piling it up. 15 feet down to... I tie... Can you guys see that? I tie a micro perfection loop here. I used to use Tippet Rings, and I think they're an amazing tool. I really like Tippet Rings. There's no disadvantage to them. I moved away from them simply because in a competition setting, when you've got 3 hours to go maximize the amount of fish that you catch, if you break this here and it's another thing to dig around in your bag for, I can tie a perfection loop faster than I can go find my Tippet Rings and tie one on. Now, I think a Tippet Ring is a little bit superior connection. I've done this simply for efficiency. And then I just tie with a clinch knot on right here, my tippet. This happens to be 7X, which I was fishing down in Deckers, and I don't think a lot of people like fishing 7X. I tend to love it. These long rods, one of the huge advantages of that tip is really, really soft. So you get to hold a lot of this stuff. Do I use a sinking leader also? I do not use a sinking leader. I do all monofilament, typically nylon for those. What material indicators do you prefer? We'll run through what's in my pack here in a minute. For regular like high-vis indicator stuff, I use the Umpqua two-tone. You've got a nice 18 inches of yellow followed by red. And in different lighting conditions, these stand out differently. One of the things that I do a lot now on these micro leaders is I've got this neon wax. And one of the things, the whole point of our indicator in this whole process, right, is when I take this is what determines the angle my flies. So this is my visual indicator of what's happening. If I'm fishing a really deep hole in the canyon in Cheeseman and I see fish kind of really, they're moving around and they're straight down, I've got to fish my flies vertically, right? Because I need to access the bottom. Now, if I'm going to go fish a nice riffle on the Colorado and I have my sighter at this angle, my flies are literally getting hung up every chance they get. I need to keep my flies at a much lower angle like this to keep them moving through the riffle. And so this is really the depth that I'm fishing flies. I think my favorite kind of analogy for this is if you're going to be fishing a riffle and it's a great riffle drop, which we see all the time, you're going to start by fishing the riffle really, really low angle. And about the time your flies hit the drop, you let this just gently fall underneath the rod tip and it'll follow that contour really, really nicely. So the reason I use wax, not only is the micro leader a little harder to see, but more importantly, because I like to keep my rig as dialed as possible, my depth changes. And versus having, if I'm going to fish really shallow, I can take some of this neon and just rub it right on my clear tippet, and it gives me a little visual indicator if I'm going to fish shallow for a little bit. And when I'm done fishing shallow, I can literally squeegee it off and fish my standard sighter. So that's really helpful for me. Neon wax, I've got it in 2 different colors, again, depending on lighting. It's the same idea as this. It's just movable, and it would be like when Pat Dorsey explains about putting a little weight on his, starting out with split shot and then doing the tungsten putty on top of it to adjust it for that specific spot. It's the same thing, but for depth control. Can you please help us get some... Here in South Africa, our trout fishing is insane, but we need more updated Euro gear. I couldn't agree more. I know some of your South African buddies from the Worlds. You guys do have some really cool trout fishing. What X is your indicator material? If I were to put an X on what I've got in my hand here, this is about 4X. There are, again, a lot of advantages. The big advantage is at distance. This weighs nothing. We're about to take a look at the second leader. And so this has no weight to it. And at really far distances, the weight of your leader will start to pull your flies back towards you. So having an ultra-light leader that's very, very fine like this allows me to keep my flies at distance and let them hang much more naturally than if it's heavy and my leader then starts to fall back. It will pull my flies back towards me significantly faster than the current. So I tend not to use this other leader at distance. So let me move this tangled mess out of the way here for a moment. And we're going to take a look at my other leader. So this is the leader when the U.S. team kind of really got a little bit more sophisticated in what we were doing. This was the leader that we all started to fish. I've got a couple leaders jammed in here. So here's one of my reserve level tippets. So you can see it's just all high vis. It's about 15 feet of this. And this is my micro leader. This is probably my favorite nymphing leader, period. Very, very cool stuff. This one is my all-around leader. So if you're going to pick up one of the new Umpqua Phantom X leaders that are going to be coming out in the future here, this is largely what you're going to get. If you were to... Most of the off-the-shelf options are more like this. Someone asked about what pound is my butt material. My butt material is about 20 pound on this, and it's good energy transfer from the end of my fly line. So let me take a moment and unwrap this leader so I don't tangle it, like I did my other one. Let's see, I'll read some comments while I do this here. What do you use for French-style dry fly fishing? For French-style dry fly fishing, I will use this leader here more than I will use the micro leader. Now I can still fish the micro leader if I'm going to be exclusively dry fly fishing. When I am out on the water, more often than not, I actually have two rods with me. One that's appropriately set up to fish dries and another rod that is specifically for nymphing, because being a generalist in the competitive world, I believe, doesn't help you at all. So here's my other leader, and I'm just going to pull it tight for a second here, stretch it out so it's not so curly. It starts out... How long is your tippet section typically with the first setup you showed? My tippet section is all based on the depth of the water. I want to take pretty much the exact water depth and match that to my top fly. So I've got about an extra 18 inches deeper than the water. So a lot of times my biggest comfort level is to probably have it be a standard arm span, which is about 5.5 feet for me when I do it, and that allows me then to take the wax, and if I need it shorter. Do you prefer lake fishing or river streams? Equal. It depends on the day. I think that's a great question. We can do another one of these at a later date. I've got a lot. In my life, I do about 50-50. So I do a lot. Micro leader sounds good for competition. Sensitivity-wise, for small trout, it will be better. Absolutely. The 20-pound butt on this one is tapered down to, it's about 3 feet here, to minimum distance of 18 inches of 16 pound, minimum distance of 10 pound, down to 8 pound high vis. I step this down really aggressively through here to ensure really good turnover, right? With a longer butt so I can extend that out away from me. The old rule of thumb, right, for physics, it takes mass to move mass. The micro leader begins to hinge quite a bit if you're going to fish bigger, heavy flies, because it has no mass to it. This leader handles that really, really nicely. And this leader also allows me to fish dry flies very effectively in addition to dry dropper, like phenomenally well. And fish it like you would fish on a regular rod. Let's see, Tippet Rings. This one, again, ends in the exact same way that my other one did here, in a perfection loop. It's, again, what I've moved to, but I think Tippet Rings are an incredible tool, as I said earlier here. What size for pressured fish, like in Cheeseman? Any advice for high-pressured fish will help. Boy, yeah, high-pressured fish are absolutely tough. Cheeseman's a place that I think it's a more unique set of rules we play by in Cheeseman Canyon than other places. But the things I do in Cheeseman different than other places is I take away a lot of so many of my flies will have hot spots built into them. I pull out a lot of those hot spots and I go with really subtle drab flies. And then I use larger attractor, kind of like whether it be an egg, a worm, or a leech, to bring them to the rig. And I find overwhelmingly they eat the small techie fly in like an 18. Then I can still get like a 2.5 millimeter tungsten bead on, compared to whatever kind of additional junk I'm fishing to bring them over to my rig. The other thing I do with Cheeseman is I put my heavy fly off the top dropper, and I put my secondary fly on the point or in the back. Typically that's reversed. I like my heavy one down here, followed my lighter one up here, but Cheeseman's a little bit different. Let's see, someone asks, I know this is about Euro, but what gives people a competitive advantage in lake fishing? I hooked up with one fish on the lake in the Wyoming comp. Lake fishing in general, to me, this is a real quick diversion to answer a question. Lake fishing to me is about understanding why fish congregate in a lake, just like we understand why fish will congregate in certain areas of a river. It's much easier to read a river because we know where food congregates, what fish need to feel comfortable in their habitat. A lot of people look at a lake and they're like, it all looks the same. We can dive into lakes at a different time, but I think understanding the why fish congregate in a lake is the key to a lot of lakes. Would a micro leader be better for dry dropper? I say I am at trials, and during my beat I came across a dry dropper water. Should I switch to a micro leader or not? If you've got a micro leader on, I would absolutely fish it. I do it all the time. This leader, if you're going to be fishing dry dropper, I certainly think that this is kind of my preferred dry dropper over the micro leader. Now, it's not always the case. I usually fish what I've got, like I said. So if I want to fish some dry dropper, and the beauty of dry dropper is, just like we're so used to doing with indicators, is suspension. And we could suspend those flies right in where those fish might be feeding. Versus our nymphs, one of the things I see so many people do is fish too heavy a fly for the water they're fishing. And what happens is you get what's called vertical drag. So unnaturally, flies are falling down to the bottom, and then they're moving too quickly in water types that are really, really slow. So we'll jump into flies here in a second. But are there any other questions on leaders before I kind of leave this world? I fish 2 leaders. We can kind of post the comment or the formulas for those leaders after the video's over if you guys would like. But I fish 2 leaders. I fish light tippets. Light tippet, the real advantage of that is your cutting rate when it comes to your flies. So I'm going to kind of like unload and do a quick little like what's in my bag. This is what I've used to. I was a vest geek forever. Never thought I'd get away from a vest, but the bandolier here has become one of my favorite packs. It's an Umpqua pack. Real quick, to answer some questions, I have never fished Pyramid Lake. It's on the list. Favorite leader materials to use, please. Maxima is a wonderful material. What you're looking for in a nylon is something that is very, very stiff. You want a stiff nylon so it turns over, delivers but then hangs, right? Because that is your visual cue to what's happening. With the long line, one of the things I didn't mention is you're typically watching for that leader to jump, versus when you're doing the short line down deep stuff, you're going to feel those takes right about the same time you see them. But when you're long lining, you need visual cues to watch those leaders jump. And so a leader that wants to sag and doesn't want to remain stiff doesn't jump nearly as well. So hopefully that makes sense on that one. Let's see. This will be archived on Trouts afterwards. So thanks for asking. So in my bag here, I've got on the very top, I've mounted a little fly box here. This is kind of my working box, the stuff I'm in and out of daily. I can take this off and mount it to my waders and have my lanyard here. And I try to not go behind me very often. I'm a huge snack guy on the river, so you always got to have some snacks. One of the things that you really like, how many of you guys have been out on the water and you're fishing away and you're sitting there grinding and you're thinking to yourself, I know I should change. But I'm not going. I'm going to keep grinding. Your brain isn't, it's because fuel for your body is absolutely huge. So I am constantly snacking. It keeps you engaged in your activities at a significantly higher level than if you let yourself start to become calorie hungry. So I bring a lot of snacks. I'm not afraid of snacks. So I've got my lanyard nippers. Like I said, I like to fish out of my wader pocket. I've really, this time of year, I've got my life down to 3 boxes, which we'll run through. I always keep the Shimazaki spray, dry shake spray, and then the dry shake. This is the refill, but just dry shake in general. If you haven't used the spray, I know the guys at Trouts have this. This stuff is unbelievable. It's great for CDC. It's great for hackled flies. It's great for synthetics. Literally, you take it and spray it, and it literally infuses itself into the material, and in about 10 seconds, it's fully dry, and it fishes so well. These are my floatants I bring with me. I keep in here... a nail knot tool, and you can see this is why I don't like tippet rings. So here are my tippet rings, the Umpqua 2mm tippet rings. They're a great tippet ring. This is what I do use. It just takes time. I keep a nail knot tool because I don't glue my leader in anymore. I nail knot it, and so if I need to nail knot my leader back on, I've got a tool to do so. I've got some standard 4X leaders for dry fly fishing. And I can talk a little bit about my dry fly leader. And then I've got a bunch of tippet. My gosh, you never want to run out of tippet. So I've got, I've got 4X, 5X, 6X, 6X, another spool of 6X, 7X, 7X, and one more 6X. Nothing ruins a day versus to not have your tippet. I check my tippet every time I go out. If I'm low, I put in an extra spool in case I lose it. I do have an indicator in my bag. There's a time and a place that is killer for these. I've got my nippers in my pack. I've got hemos in my pack in case I ever needed them. Got a cute little pin. And then on this, I'm able to take my big kind of net here with a deep bag. And attach it to the bottom of my bag. And so I've got a ultralight setup with still my big net on there, which works really well for me. The reason for the short handle large net, scoop net, is that those long rods, I'm able to steer the fish right into me. I'm not a guide. I'm not chasing a fish for a client. I'm bringing it to me. Right, so I'm using the length of my rod, and it literally comes in. I don't need a long handle net for self-landing fish. Long handle nets are awesome if you're going to chase a fish for a client, and you need that extra extension. For my fishing, this is perfect. and a really deep bag so I can get in there, handle the fish without ever having to take them out of the water, lower this, and watch them swim away. It is on a retractor for me. My son's been messing with this. It's on a retractor, so if I'm fighting a fish and I think it's ready to land and it's not, I can literally drop the net, get my hand back on the reel, and keep going. Like, I watch so many people with great fish, critical fish, that are tucking a net under their and trying to reel like this, and they've lost all focus on what really matters. Using retractors, focus on the fish, let go of the net, get it back where it needs to be, and then get it in the net. So as this stuff is all, I'm using all this tippet at a different time. 7X I use in places like Cheeseman where I do have to get technical. 6X I'll use in Cheeseman. 4X I'll use for my dry fly on a dropper rig. And it's really like I won't go much lighter than 5X. The problem is with the micro leader, if you're fishing heavy, if you're fishing heavier than 5X, with this dyed material, even though the diameter is much thicker, you're coming in against the breaking strength of this. So instead of breaking down here where you want, because this is easy to re-rig, we've built this in, you're going to break in here, you're going to drastically shorten your leader, and you're going to have to retie a perfection loop and re-rig. So that's why I don't really fish heavier than 5X, especially on the micro rig. So the 3 fly boxes, if anyone just joined us, we're doing a live here at Trouts. This is Russ Miller with Umpqua Feather Merchants, running through some European stuff. So the 3 boxes I've got this time of year, I've got my little tailwater guy here. You can see when I'm talking about attractor patterns, eggs, this is what they're eating. And so I've got some CDC emergent dries. I've got a lot of kind of like, I call them little like midgedagons. They're little perdigon style midges. I don't know, is that coming into focus for you guys there? In a variety of colors. Some have a little bit more flash. Some are very, very subtle. This is, for those guys that know, this fly here, on the East Coast, they call it the trout brain. And it's a giant yarny with a 4mm bead. And if you got a lot of stalkers in the area, man, that little thing's a magic bullet. And on the back side here, these are some of my favorite little leeches. I call them the hard body leech. Just some basic jig leeches, some thinner body squirmies, and then mop flies. The beauty of a mop fly, and we talked about this in the January five flies, this is really a parachute for my little techie stuff, right? So when I'm talking about fishing this, that mop fly, when it gets wet and rolling around in those deep, deep currents, the whole rig slows down like it's a giant parachute. So all-time favorite tailwater check rig for Colorado. That's time of year. I'd probably grab this box just because I love leeches on tailwaters. Some of my favorite are leeches. Cheeseman has a great population of crane flies, which works really, really well. Yeah, someone's laughing at the mop flies. This is a dirty box. I'll just be very clear in saying that. There's not a lot of pride in showing you this, but I'm showing you everything I got here. And then these are kind of my other 2 nymph boxes. So double-sided here. This is very much my working box. So in here I've got stoneflies, I've got a couple worms, I've got some mop flies, my jig streamers, some dry flies here that I like to fish, and then just a collection of some of my other favorite bugs. I fish this side of it a ton. The reason I love these boxes with the magnets built in, you can see everything I'm going to show you has magnets on it, because when you're fishing, sitting there, I don't care what box you've got, sitting there and trying to like reorganize a fly, I literally throw it on the magnet and I'll do it when I get home. The magnets turn into my working area. These are kind of flies that I know I'm rotating in and out. But the magnet allows I get to keep my flies, but I also get to reorganize them later, because I do like to be organized here, which is really nice. A lot of what I do too, all of these are my ties. What I really like to do is tie a lot of my favorite flies in a variety of different weights. And that way I can really hang my flies at the level I want to have them kind of living at. So this is another one of my boxes. This time of year, I'll fish this side. Guys are talking about little techie Cheeseman flies. This guy right here, it is it's not a complex fly, but it's one of my favorites in Cheeseman. It's pheasant tail and peacock, and that's it. I've got it in both a natural and a black. That's one of my favorite Cheeseman guys right there. My bead flies, thanks for the comment there. My favorite bead sizes, really it's like 2 up to 4, depending on what it is. And this is my other box here. This one I'm still rebuilding out this winter, but someone asked if these are tungsten or brass. Everything in this box, all 3 of those boxes that I've got here. So this is these are my kind of 3 boxes that I take with me on the water. What I really do most of the time is this box, which is my primary working box. I put that in my wader pocket. I wear my lanyard. I put my spool of tippet that I'm going to fish. If I know I'm fishing 6X for the day, I put a spool of 6X in here. And I'll put this right on my waders with my Velcro. And that's really what I fish all the time. So these are kind of here for reserve. In the summer months, you'll see I've got 2 different dry fly boxes that are set up for dry dropper fishing that'll integrate into my pack. But like this is what I'm going out with right now. Flies are, this is what catches the fish. Recently I've gotten way more into less flash, like these tag nymphs. When they're on it, frickin' crushes. And when they are not on it, you'll watch fish run from it. Or a big direction I'm going a lot more these days. Let's see here. Do you weigh your nymphs? If you do, I don't weigh my nymphs. I organize them by bead size, and I visually look at them, and I'll plug them into the water. And if it's too heavy, I have typically the same fly in a lighter size. And if it's not heavy enough, I typically have the same fly in a heavier size, or I'll put on one of my kind of anchory flies that is almost just a dummy fly to help get it down. Again, when we were talking about kind of the sighter being the opportunity for you to fish shallow or fish deep, your fly positioning can really help. So I'll take those like 3.5 millimeter nymphs. If I'm fishing some heavy water, you'd be shocked at how heavy a water trout will lie in. And so I'll take some of those heavy nymphs and I'll plug them down in there. And I'll always have in that scenario my heaviest fly on the bottom. And then when I rig this up, let's see, I'll grab some of this stuff so we can see it. Man, I've never been a person that can bite tippet. I'm like so impressed by people that can. My dentist is probably happier with me, but so when I'm tying, unfortunately there's not a lot of complexity in the knots. My leaders are all done with blood knots. Everything else I'm going to do a surgeon's knot and a clinch knot. So your surgeon's knot you always do, right? I do a 3. And you can see when I'm doing this, I've got this really long tag end you see here. And this will be the downstream end. This will be where I'll tie my flies. I do it 2 times. I do it 3 times. I always lubricate my knot and pull slowly to tighten. And then, so here's my knot, right? What I'm going to do is take this end and trim it off. And on that downstream, this is the tag. And this is going to be to my bottom fly, my point fly. And so the beauty of this is if you were to be able to hold this, and I pull on my bottom fly, or I pull on my tag, the registration in my fingers is exactly the same regardless of which is being pulled, right? And that's why we fish this method. It doesn't work tying it in line. If you were to tie it in line, right, typically we put our heaviest fly here, and then we put our small light emerger back here. It's got to take the weight. The fish has to take this fly hard enough to move the weight of this before it registers here, right? This one, the registration is very, very equal. Let's see. Generally, do you want to be ticking the bottom? The best way to answer that is if you can visually see fish sitting on the bottom, yes, you want to be ticking bottom because that's where they're holding. If I'm ticking bottom a lot, I'm just literally taking flies out of my boxes and throwing them in the river. I like to be off the bottom. Trout are always willing to do this. Move up to a fly. Trout don't tip down and feed off the bottom typically. Now you'll see it every now and then. There are no absolutes in our sport. But for the most part, they're oriented to do this. So I'd rather be above them than below them. And brown trout in particular, and cutties, it's amazing how far you'll watch them come up through the currents to eat a fly. It's wild. So we've got a question here. What's the difference between fishing in better locations versus changing flies? That's a really good question. One of the things I really like about these methods is the point of them is to be effective. And when you can be effective, you can start to better pattern fish. And so when we can better pattern fish, we can find out if it is the fly or the location. And so a lot of times I will find fish in very specific water types, and I will just go run and consume those water types as quickly as I can. Other times when you're not getting many fish, it's a tough day. You'll literally just grind it out and you don't know which one is which. But there are times where you stumble upon the magic bullet fly and you put it on and catch. And there are other times where you can identify a water type and you literally walk the river until you find that water type and it's fish, which is really, really fun when that happens. Because everything's dynamic. It changes very, very quickly. So yeah, that's the way I rig my whole setup here. Let's think. Is there any other questions anyone has? I think I'm about done running through my pile of stuff behind me here. Hopefully you guys were able to take something away from this. We were really hoping to be able to do this in person in the shop. So we appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to join in and learn a couple things. We'll certainly do more of this if you guys have more questions. But really, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you guys get out on the water, stay safe, and go say hi to the boys at Trouts. It's important we support our local retailers through all this stuff. It's really, they're without fly shops. They're the lifeblood of our entire sport. It's a reason for us to come together. Definitely not as much fun to just scroll through Instagram hoping to find something interesting. It's fun to go in and talk to people. Got a couple more questions before we're done here. When fishing at distance, is the sighter on the surface or suspended? That's a great question. Typically, I try to keep it off the water, right? I keep it at a really low angle, and as it comes back to me, the angle gets higher, right? And when you make the cast, keeping your rod as high and far away from you as possible will keep that sighter off there and allow those flies to naturally fall down and fish back towards you. There are times when we float the sighter. Floating the sighter is an amazing way to do it. I'll show you kind of a fun way. Floating the sighter is a heck of a lot easier when you have thicker diameter tippet. This is 2X I'm tying in my hand here. The 2X will literally not break the surface of the water. I'll take my same spray and I will spray my leader and it will float beautifully. I'm going to tie a quick blood knot here. So when I pull this blood knot together, my two tag ends stick out of either side. One of the awesome ways to do this, and so I'll take my spray, grease this bad boy up, and this thing will float for days, and these two forks will literally spin on the water like this, And if I get a take, you'll see them like rotate really quickly, or they'll bounce. So when you're fishing at 40 feet, leaving too long tags on your sighter can be a huge, huge asset. So that was one question. I want to hear one of your all-time favorite fly fishing stories. Oh man, that's a tough one. It was probably all-time fly fishing. Oh, it's about friends, and it happens to involve a massive fish. But yeah, we were on an overnight float in the rainforest, and magic is the best way I can describe it quickly. Thanks for the question. I wish it was better. Do you use a strike indicator? Not often. There are times where a suspension rig will absolutely outfish this Euro rig. There's no question, and there's no way to duplicate it without an indicator. So yes, I do. I do keep one in my bag with me. With the Euro rig and the wind picks up, what's your preferred method to combat it? That's another great question. This in the wind is awful. I combat it by fishing heavier, like heavy, and I do it by keeping my rod as low to the water as possible. Not my favorite way to fish, but when you have to fish through the wind, it works. Radian 10-foot 4-weight, good for indicator fishing. Absolutely, great rod for that. Any other questions? Any good fishing spots on Clear Creek and Golden Wheat Ridge? Well, below Coors, unfortunately, doesn't have any fish. I fish above Coors all the way up to the Continental Divide, and it's awesome. Let's see, is that about it? I think that's about it. I appreciate it. Looks like Josh maybe wants to pop in and say hi. This is his second request. Let's get him in here. Let's see if it happens. What rod would you recommend for a week-long Iceland fishing trip? I don't know. I've never been to Iceland. I know they have a lot of great lakes there. My favorite lake rod is the 7100. Looks like Josh just was able to join us.
Hey, how are you?
The beard is real. I've been growing this my whole life. Thanks for asking. Josh, when were you out yesterday? Well, Josh gets connected here. What would you use in fast-moving water? The faster the water, your heavier your fly, and the more vertical your indicator needs to be. The other thing with fast water is that you need to allow your flies time to sink. So cast further upstream than you think you should, and let them come back towards you a little bit longer, and it'll help get down that really fast stuff. Wyatt Ridgeway 23, shout out. I have a 9-foot 7-weight for steelhead. What would be your next rod? A 10-foot 3-weight for Euro nymphing. That's all the questions. Last one, is Euro nymphing more productive than indicator nymphing? I touched on that briefly, but I believe that in the right time and place, the Euro rig punishes, and in the right time and place, the indicator rig punishes. My comfort level has gone here. I've spent way more time with this, so I am more productive with a Euro rig than an indicator rig anymore. So I think that's a perfect sign off. Jordan says stay safe, and let's all go out and practice safe fishing. And again, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Have a good day.